In the 1930s, a group of elitists decided democracy didn't work. Too many voters, too many politicians, and too much bureaucracy. Their solution? Get rid of elections and politicians. Replace all of it with engineers running everything. They called it the Technate. One of its leaders was a chiropractor from Canada who happened to be this guy's grandfather. Nearly a century later, he'd walk into Washington with a chainsaw, a guy named Big Balls, and a Twitter account. An old fantasy had found its perfect modern salesman. Before the Technate fantasy could come back, it needed a salesman people believed in. As a kid growing up in apartheid South Africa, Elon Musk was small, awkward, and bullied so badly that one beating sent him to the hospital. Why does the world work this way? And could it work better? For him, that question drove everything in his life. He left South Africa at 17 on a Canadian passport so he could avoid mandatory military service. Subjugating black Africans for an apartheid regime wasn't for him. The internet was. He got into Stanford's PhD program, showed up, and left 2 days later. He wanted to ride the wave of the 1990s internet startup craze. His first company, Zip2, which was basically a Google Maps meets Yelp before they existed, got sold to Compaq for $307 million. His cut? $22 million. He used that money to start an online financial service called X.com. Got removed as CEO while literally on his honeymoon. That company eventually merged with its competitor Confinity and became PayPal, which eBay bought for $1.5 billion. Musk walked away with $180 million. He used that money to start SpaceX, and a couple years later he invested into Tesla and would pour more money into it, eventually pushing out the founders and taking control of the company. Almost all the money he made from PayPal went into these two companies. Within a few years, he was so overextended he was borrowing money. And it would get even worse. The 2008 financial crisis hit hard, and both his companies were on the verge of death.
Yeah, 2008, we had the third consecutive failure of the Falcon 1 rocket for SpaceX. Tesla almost went bankrupt. We closed our financing round 6 p.m. Christmas Eve, 2008. It was the last hour of the last day that it was possible. We would have gone bankrupt 2 days after Christmas otherwise. If things had just gone a little bit the other way, both companies would be dead. And I like one of the most difficult choices I've ever faced in life was in 2008. I think I had maybe $30 million left, or $30 or $40 million left in 2008. And I had two choices. I could put it all into one company, and then the other company would definitely die, or split it between the two companies. But if I split it between the two companies, then both might die. And when you put your blood, sweat, and tears into creating something, or building something, it's like a child. And so it's like, which one am I going to let one starve to death? I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I split the money between the two. Fortunately, thank goodness, they both came through.
Musk did risk his own fortune and had an insane work ethic. But money, genius, and tenacity wasn't enough. He needed something else to save his companies: the government. Tesla survived thanks to a $465 million Department of Energy loan and EV tax incentives. And the loan was just the beginning. The government had designed a credit system to encourage people to buy electric cars. Without those credits, Tesla would have lost about $700 million. Tesla's first profitable year was thanks to government policy. Same thing with SpaceX. NASA awarded SpaceX a $278 million contract in 2006 before the company had successfully reached orbit even once. The government was essentially paying for SpaceX to figure it out. By the time DOGE launched, NASA had invested $15 billion in SpaceX total. So yes, Elon Musk fought like hell and worked his ass off. But he did have some help from Uncle Sam. The public machinery he would later try to cut with a chainsaw had helped keep his companies alive. Across both companies, Musk had received at least $38 billion in government contracts, loans, subsidies, and tax credits over 2 decades, which is a pretty generous starter pack for a supposed self-made man. Wall Street and legacy car makers mocked Tesla for years, then watched it become the most valuable car company on Earth. SpaceX brought back the wonder of space exploration. Rockets crashed, exploded, missed deadlines, but Musk pushed forward. Then they started landing. When Falcon Heavy launched in 2018 and the two side boosters landed almost in sync, it became one of the most historic and amazing engineering feats in human history. And eventually, he'd set his sights on the government. But to understand the deeper idea underneath Musk's government experiment, you gotta leave Silicon Valley. You gotta leave Tesla, leave SpaceX. You need to go to Saskatchewan. October 13th, 1940. A chiropractor named Joshua Haldeman appears before a Canadian judge charged under the Defense of Canada Act. His alleged crime? Belonging to a banned subversion organization. The organization was called Technocracy Incorporated. Haldeman was one of the movement's most prominent leaders in Canada. He was also Elon Musk's grandfather. Haldeman was a farmer, but drought and depression wiped out farmers across the prairies. When he lost everything, he did what a lot of angry men do in broken times. He went looking for someone to blame. Banks, media, universities, healthcare, fascists, communists, the whole buffet. He believed they were pushing to weaken and control the population. Technocracy Incorporated emerged in the 1930s, during the darkest years of the Great Depression. Banks were collapsing, and a huge portion of the country was unemployed. Liberal democracy looked weak and slow. Politicians had failed, bankers had failed, and society saw them as corrupt. Boy, that all sure does sound familiar, doesn't it? Well, into that void stepped the technocrats. Their solution? Get rid of the politicians and bankers, and put engineers and scientists in charge. People who understood energy, production, logistics, and systems. The movement's founder, Howard Scott, summarized the whole pitch in a single slogan: government by science, social control through the power of technique. The right people with the right expertise, finally allowed to run things without democratic interference. The pitch even came with utopian perks: shorter work weeks, early retirement, energy credits for everyone, which was their way of mathematically distributing income. All you had to do was give up democracy. Under their vision, there would be no elected officials, no politicians, no political parties, no money, replaced by energy credits. No countries called the United States or Canada, replaced by a single continental unit from the Panama Canal to the Arctic Circle. They called it the Technate. In the Technate, humans would not even have names. They would have numbers, like this for example. Yeah, that's true. And remember, Elon did name one of his kids this. At its peak, Technocracy Incorporated had more than 250,000 members across North America. They marched in identical gray uniforms and drove identical gray cars. Because apparently even dystopia needs brand consistency. Technocracy wasn't left or right. It was putting engineers and scientists in charge. Ignore the voters and finally make the machine behave. One pamphlet explained that in the Technate, popular voting can be largely dispensed with. Another stated the core principle a little more directly. The movement does not subscribe to the basic tenet of the democratic ideal, namely that all men are created free and equal. Subtle stuff. Joshua Haldeman was technocrat number 10450-1. In 1940, Canada banned Technocracy Incorporated as a threat to the war effort. Haldeman was arrested, convicted, and fined. When he tried to enter the United States for a speaking tour, border officials denied him entry as a potential public safety threat. He later joined the Social Credit Party and became its national chairman. In 1950, disillusioned with Canada, he moved his family to South Africa shortly after apartheid became official policy. Yeah, interesting timing. He spent the next decade distributing pamphlets about global dictatorship, media conditioning, and his views on the equality of races. He also proposed that a watchdog financial agency to fight government waste and inefficiency was needed. In his final years, Haldeman became an aviator and an adventurer. He spent his days flying around southern Africa, searching for a legendary lost city that was rumored to exist somewhere in the wilderness. He never found it. He died in a plane crash in 1974, still chasing it. Elon Musk was barely 3 years old, so no, this is not a story about a grandson secretly executing his grandfather's master plan. Ideology is not genetic, but ideas do travel. And once you know the Technate story, parts of Musk's worldview becomes a bit more clear. In 2019, Musk tweeted that he was accelerating Starship development to build the Martian technocracy. That word choice matters. He didn't say Martian democracy or Martian republic, he said technocracy. Maybe he meant it as a sci-fi joke. I mean, Musk is known for making dumb jokes on Twitter. Technocracy Incorporated imagined replacing money with rationalized credit system. Musk's first big ambition after Zip2 was X.com, an online financial system meant to make old banking structures obsolete. Technocracy treated politicians as an inefficient layer sitting on top of technical reality. Musk has spent years arguing professional politicians are the problem. Technocracy imagined society as an engineering problem. So of course he would take his work ethic and engineering approach to Washington. It was the old Technate fantasy of cutting budgets and treating democracy like bad software. The question was whether Elon Musk could do to Washington what he had done to cars and rockets. First though, something changed in Musk himself. There was once a time people called Elon Musk the real-life Tony Stark. Sure, if you stripped away the looks, charm, genius, and charisma, well, he is still an eccentric billionaire. But before he became the most hated man in America, he was the guy who made electric cars cool, who reignited the dream of space exploration. But then came COVID, and something started to shift. Like his grandfather before him, Musk was about to discover that personal frustration with broken systems is a powerful gateway to ideology. The lockdowns changed Musk's relationship with the government. Tesla's Fremont factory was forced to close. Musk raged against the restrictions, called shelter-in-place orders fascist, threatened to move Tesla out of California and reopen the factory in defiance of local rules. To critics, this looked reckless. To everyone else, this was Musk standing up against government overreach. Technocracy Incorporated's greatest villain, and a machine he hated most, slow, political, irrational, and powerful enough to stop his factory. Then came the Biden snub. In 2021, the White House held an electric vehicle summit and invited GM, Ford, and Stellantis. Tesla, the company that had done more than anyone to make EVs desirable, was not invited. Biden refused to acknowledge Tesla in public statements about American EV progress. For Musk, this was personal. He had spent 2 decades taking electric cars into the mainstream, survived bankruptcy, was rescued partly by a government loan, and the president was pretending he didn't exist because he hadn't signed a union card. And if there's one thing Elon Musk is known for, is the level of maturity he shows when he feels slighted. So of course this became proof for him, that the people in charge were not just slow, they were rigging the game for their friends. In Musk's mind, it confirmed the old technocratic suspicion. Democratic institutions don't reward merit. They reward loyalty and protect insiders. And they punish the qualified for refusing to play by their rules. COVID cracked something, the Biden snub personalized it, and Twitter would pour gasoline all over it. In ancient Rome, when a victorious general rode through the city with crowds roaring and cheering, he had a servant standing behind him whose only job was to whisper in his ear, "Memento homo," which translates to, "Remember, you are only a man." It was meant to humble the general and that, no matter your achievements, you are not a god. Elon Musk needed that voice. Instead, he bought Twitter. By October in 2022, he bought the whole company for $44 billion, a price everyone knew was insanely high. Even him, because he tried to back out of the deal. But it was too late. Twitter sued and he was forced to overpay and buy it anyway, which is a very expensive way to discover impulse control. He walked in day one carrying a literal kitchen sink, posted the video with the caption, "Entering Twitter HQ, let that sink in." Dorky, which is on brand. Within hours, the CEO, CFO, and heads of legal, policy, and trust and safety were all fired. Then came the email. Musk told remaining employees Twitter would become, quote, "extremely hardcore." Long hours, high intensity, no remote work softness. Remember, the technocracy movement didn't view people as humans. They were engineers who worked and worked and worked. Anyone who wanted to stay had to click yes. Anyone who refused could take severance and leave. He gave them about 24 hours to make their decision. Hundreds quit. Entire teams vanished. The people who understood moderation, ad relationships, privacy, compliance, infrastructure, all the boring invisible work that keeps a platform from catching fire had a simple choice: submit or disappear. Musk cut about 80% of the workforce. And to be fair, Twitter kept functioning without them. The company really was bloated. Too many middle managers and too many people whose jobs were hard to explain, so they were able to slip under the radar and do little to nothing. And to Musk, this is where the Technate fantasy made it clear. The people were the friction. The machine was what mattered. Cut deep enough, ignore the screaming, and the system still runs. And he'd take that same approach into Washington, but would experience a much different lesson. Twitter kept loading, but surviving is not the same thing as working well or innovating. Desperate for revenue after overpaying, he sold verification, those little blue check marks? Almost immediately, fake verified accounts impersonated brands and public figures. One fake account posing as Eli Lilly announced insulin would be free, and the company's stock briefly dropped. Turns out selling credibility for $8 has side effects. He unbanned controversial accounts and allowed unrestricted free speech on the platform. And with that came more harassment and a platform that felt increasingly toxic to users. A lot of advertisers saw that and said, no thanks, which last I checked is how free market capitalism works. Musk, of course, responded by threatening to sue them.
Leaving, we talked to Bob Iger today.
I hope they stop.
You hope?
Don't advertise.
You don't want them to advertise?
No.
What do you mean?
If somebody's going to try to blackmail me with advertising, blackmail me with money, go fuck yourself.
But
Go fuck yourself. Is that clear?
Nothing says free speech absolutist like trying to force companies to fund your website. Then he killed the bird and renamed the company X, replacing 16 years of global brand recognition with a single letter he'd loved his whole life. Some users loved the new platform, others left. Advertisers never fully came back. Twitter gave Musk a version of the Technate dream, a public square governed by a single technical owner who decided who got heard, who got amplified, and who got silenced. Visibility, reach, punishment, reward, all determined by one man's code. And Musk became its most powerful user, and its most addicted one. He spent hours a day posting, responding, fighting, cracking cringy jokes, and turning himself into the main character of his own platform. The best example was Super Bowl 57. Musk tweeted about the game. It got 9 million impressions. Biden tweeted about the game. It got 29 million impressions. So naturally, this became an emergency. At 2:36 in the morning, Musk's cousin James sent an urgent message asking Twitter engineers who could make dashboards and write software to help solve the problem. When bleary-eyed engineers opened their laptops in the middle of the night, the emergency became clear. The owner of Twitter was getting fewer likes than the president, who Musk called a damp sock puppet in human form. Roughly 80 engineers were pulled into work on the platform overnight. Musk flew his private jet to San Francisco to personally confront his team. He had previously fired a senior engineer who told him his engagement was declining because, as the engineer politely said, interest in him had simply declined. You're fired, Musk had reportedly said on the spot. By Monday afternoon, the problem had been fixed. Twitter deployed code to automatically greenlight Musk's tweets, bypassing the platform's own filters. The algorithm artificially boosted Musk's posts by a factor of 1,000, a score applied to exactly one account on the entire platform. Internally, they called it a power user multiplier. Users opened the app and found Elon everywhere. No matter what, you could not escape him. To celebrate, Musk posted a meme of Twitter users being forced to drink milk, the milk being his tweets. Let that sink in. The man who built reusable rockets and dragged the auto industry toward electric cars was now rigging his own platform because Sleepy Joe got more likes. Twitter amplified Elon's worst tendencies. The people who had worked with him for years started saying this wasn't the Musk they knew. The Musk who obsessed over rocket reusability and battery chemistry. The Musk who would cancel a meeting to go fix a production line problem himself. That person was technically still in charge of Tesla and SpaceX, but he spent a lot of time shitposting on Twitter. Staring at a phone, posting at 2 a.m., responding to trolls. Twitter gave him something SpaceX and Tesla never had. An instant, unfiltered audience of 100 million people reacting to his every thought in real time. Pure, frictionless influence and attention. The platform gave him the most dangerous product that sells anyone, the feeling that every thought deserves an audience. Musk learned a public system could be purchased, renamed, reorganized, and bent around one personality. So he'd carry that lesson into Washington. Only this time, the system didn't belong to him. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. A meme name for a project tasked with removing $2 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse. If Technocracy Incorporated had been born in the age of memes, it probably would have sounded a lot like this. Replace politicians with programmers, replace debate with dashboards, replace messy public process with a small team of technical people moving fast because they believe the system is too broken to deserve patience. Washington would finally feel that startup pressure. A lot of people wanted to believe it. American government does have waste, and many do feel the game is rigged. Federal spending has climbed for decades, agencies overlap, contractors get paid obscene amounts for work nobody outside of Washington can explain. People see that federal budget line and the numbers stop feeling real. Billions here, trillions there, a contract that somehow requires consultants, sub-consultants, travel expenses, and so-called meetings that look a lot like parties. So when a modern-aged version of the technocracy movement with a fresh coat of paint asked the public to quote, "let the smart people run things," and then promised to cut the waste, people listened. The pitch sounds especially attractive when institutions feel slow, expensive, corrupt, and out of touch. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In his first few days, Musk sent young engineers with no security clearances, including a 19-year-old called Big Balls, into some of the most sensitive data systems in the federal government. No politicians or people with any government experience, just a bunch of nerdy programmers now running things. This was exactly what the members of the Technocracy Incorporated dreamed of. They gained access to treasury payment systems, social security records, personnel files for hundreds of thousands of federal workers. One operative given direct access to treasury systems responsible for nearly all federal payments was a 25-year-old named Marco Alez, who had previously worked for 2 Musk companies. He had the ability to send or withhold payments to millions of Americans. This was salaries, benefits, grants, medical programs, disaster funds, contractor payments, money Congress had already approved, moving through pipes most Americans never see because the whole point is that they work quietly. Then came the email. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees, FBI agents, State Department diplomats, Veteran Affairs employees, Pentagon staff, received a demand. Reply within 48 hours with 5 bullet points describing what you accomplished last week. Musk posted on X that failure to respond would be treated as a resignation. The kind of ruthless stunt can work in a company, you could see Twitter for that, not so much in government. The FBI told employees to ignore it, the State Department told employees to ignore it, the Pentagon told employees to ignore it, the Department of Energy, Homeland Security, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ignore it. A company has an org chart. A constitutional government has lawful authority. Musk had confused access with command. Harvard historian Jill Lepore, who had spent years researching Musk's family history, concluded that a lot of what Musk attempted at DOGE can be found almost word for word in the technocracy manuals of the 1930s. DOGE, just like technocracy, was sold as a math problem. Remove the friction and trust the engineers. But the friction had names and families. Lives that didn't fit neatly on a dashboard. Utah Republican Senator John Curtis put it this way.
If I could say one thing to Elon Musk, it's like, please put a dose of compassion in this. These are real people. These are real lives. These are mortgages. It's a false narrative to say we have to cut and you have to be cruel to do it as well. We can do both.
And remember that $38 billion, the government contracts, loans, and subsidies that kept Musk's companies alive at their most critical moments? Well, according to public reporting, at least 11 federal agencies that DOGE targeted for cuts, layoffs, or firings had open investigations, pending complaints, or active enforcement actions against Musk's own companies at the time. In other words, the man cutting the watchdogs was also one of the people they were supposed to be watching.
Turns off!
Then USAID began to collapse, and this is where the story gets politically radioactive because both things can be true at once. USAID did have verified waste, it had questionable grants, and the kind of corrupt spending that makes taxpayers wonder who exactly is watching the numbers. But it also delivered humanitarian aid to more than 160 countries, food programs, disease prevention, maternal health, emergency relief, medicine, logistics, and all the boring life-saving infrastructure built over decades. DOGE treated the agency like a bloated line item. Programs fighting HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, Ebola, and malnutrition stalled or died. Humanitarian food that was already purchased was left to rot. Public health researchers later estimated the cuts may have contributed to hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths, many of them children. Supporters of DOGE disputed those numbers. The FAA lost critical safety inspectors, the National Weather Service lost meteorologists during active tornado season, the Social Security Administration lost staff processing disability claims for terminally ill Americans. Some fired employees had to be rehired because their jobs were required by law. Among them, people responsible for securing the United States nuclear arsenal. An error-ridden AI tool built by a DOGE intern led to the cancellation of nearly 600 federal contracts. Most had to be restored. This is where the Technate fantasy breaks down. In the world of tech, you can move fast and break things, but federal programs sit inside chains of law, logistics, and human dependency. You can't exactly rip out the wiring without checking what it powered. If a rocket explodes, engineers learn. If software breaks, developers patch it. If a humanitarian supply chain stops, children don't get a clean rollback. The technocrats promised clean math would replace messy politics. When DOGE was formed, Musk promised a lot too. This is how much DOGE originally wanted to cut.
We can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah, but then just months later, he'd lower that target.
Our goal is to reduce the deficit by $1 trillion.
Then even that $1 trillion target dropped to $150 billion. So much for trying to cut $2 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse. So of course, to make it look like they actually exceeded goals, DOGE's own website claimed $175 billion in savings. But even that wasn't true. They launched a digital wall of receipts claiming $52.8 billion in immediate savings. But once journalists started investigating those numbers, the website quietly deleted its most inflated claims. That so-called $52.8 billion in savings? Politico found the verified savings were actually $1.4 billion. And if that wasn't embarrassing enough, a Senate PSI minority staff report estimated the rush to disrupt government had actually cost taxpayers $21.7 billion. The report described the government actually paying federal employees not to work and paying others to fix what broke. So the project built to eliminate waste had become a generator of it. But Musk's public image took such a massive hit, the backlash followed him into his companies. Tesla sales were collapsing, especially in Europe, because for the first time, BYD, the Chinese EV giant that Musk once laughed off, outsold them.
BYD, which is also on the West Coast, I think they're ramping up production of their electric vehicles. Warren Buffett owns 10% stake in that. Why do you laugh?
Tesla showrooms became protest sites. Some owners who bought Tesla cars actually removed the logo or put clarifying bumper stickers out of embarrassment. Wall Street analyst Dan Ives, one of Tesla's loudest bulls, called 2025 a dark chapter, a black cloud created by Musk's politics. The man who built electric cars into an aspirational brand had turned himself into a brand risk. By May of 2025, Musk was out, and just several months later, DOGE was basically dead. A project announced like a revolution ended like an expired office memo. Elon Musk was once asked if DOGE was a success.
Do you think you were successful?
We're a little bit successful. We were somewhat successful.
This from a man who sells full self-driving cars, Mars colonies, robo-taxis, brain-computer interfaces, and the Everything app. Somewhat successful is what defeat sounds like from Elon Musk. The Technate had always sold itself the same way. The right people, the smart people, the qualified, running things without the inefficiency of voting or the inconvenience of people's opinions. The trouble is, the Technate had never beaten democracy. It lost in the US when FDR turned the country around, and lost again in 1940 when Canada banned it. Then the updated meme version of it lost again in 2025 when Musk walked into Washington with a bunch of computer engineers and got pushed back out by the slow, corrupt, bloated system he'd promised to fix. Elon Musk is already back at Tesla and SpaceX, and at the time of this video, he's worth almost $800 billion, on track to become the first trillionaire in human history. Nothing says cut the fat like an almost trillionaire deciding the expensive part was everyone else. His grandfather Joshua Haldeman also wanted to replace democracy with engineers. They threw him out. He then died in a plane crash in 1974 searching for a lost city that didn't exist. The grandson, Elon Musk, also tried the same thing and failed, or somewhat successfully failed, and he's currently chasing a city on Mars. Nearly a century after the Technate failed, the old dream came back with better branding, a bigger bank account, and a Twitter account. The country held. This time.